recently heard Dave Meltzer definitively state on his radio show that there is no such thing as a tweener in pro wrestling booking. A caller was discussing the idea of a more MMA-style approach with less clearly defined heel and baby faces, but still having guys with clear-cut goals and well-defined personalities. Mr. Meltzer, in any case, said a tweener in wrestling only boils down to ineffective booking. And then the emailer sends some examples of different tweeners over the years. Basically, he just wants your thoughts on, is there a way to effectively and intentionally book a tweener?
Well, but see, that's the thing is you can't. What's the phrase? The less a man makes declarative statements, the less likely he is to be proven a fool in retrospect. You can't just say something will never work or something won't ever work. A tweener now, it depends on what kind of tweener. Because the world champion back in the old days, the NWA, was by definition a tweener because he would go to the territories and he would wrestle either a top main event babyface or main event heel, whoever the promoter thought he could draw the most money out of. And so the world champion was expected to either be cheered and be supported by the fans against a heel, or be booed and always people wanted to see a title change. So, that by nature was kind of a tweener, but that was an odd situation. And you can have a tweener in a specific angle. So, for example, and once again, I don't know. I've never sat down and done the research, but people have told me that at least in the modern era, I know there was some three-way matches in the 60s, but we had the triple threat match in Smoky Mountain Wrestling in 1993, I believe, before they had the three-way dance in ECW, and JR just happened, I was in contact with him at the time and working for the WWF, and I know that he brought the triple threat match up to the WWE. He called me one day and said, how did you do that thing? How did it work? What were the rules? And then, of course, they ended up I did an elimination, whereas they did first pins. They did it differently. But point being, in that instance, it was Tracy Smothers, who was a complete babyface. It was Brian Lee, who was a complete heel, and it was Tony Anthony, the Dirty White Boy, who had been a heel, but I knew and had visioned down the road was going to have issues with Brian Lee and was going to turn babyface. But at that point, he was a tweener in terms of he was mad at both the other guys in the match, but he was still a heel to anybody else outside it. You can't just suddenly because you have an issue with a guy that they like and a guy they don't like. You can't just suddenly be in the middle with everybody, and you have to be true to what you've been up to that point, and you still have to change and settle on one side or another when that angle is finished. You can't just make a career out of, well, this guy doesn't care who he wrestles, because then the fans don't care about you either. If they don't know whether to boo you strongly or cheer you strongly, then they're going to be apathetic.
Yeah, I think the key to a successful tweener, there's really two examples that have always stuck out to me. The first one you brought up, which is the world champion in the old system, where he needs to be able to adapt. It's not that he's not a baby or a heel, it's that it's kind of changing based on who the opponent is.
The people understood, and it's just like, having a 7-foot guy, that's great. You got a giant, but if you got 12 7-foot guys, you got no giants because everybody's the same size. With the world champion, that was a one and only situation where that worked. And the people understood this guy is the world champion. He wrestles all over the world for every promoter. He makes a ton of money as long as he's the world champion. So if he has to cheat, he'll cheat. Or if he can wrestle and beat the guy, he'll wrestle and beat the guy. He is the one and only, the exception that defines the rule.
And then I think you also sometimes, maybe it's a guy with an ethnic following, so you have certain segments that like him and certain segments that dislike him, or the NWO. In a lot of markets, they were the baby faces. But
now listen. Now here's the thing: they weren't tweeners. They had people. There's a difference in a tweener and people who having talent who people like and who people hate. Because I'm a tweener because some people like me and some people hate my guts. But it's not like I am trying to be in the middle and not be a heel or a baby face. I am what I am, and that's the people's response to it. When you book someone to be a tweener, where one night they heel and they cheat, and the next night they're virtuous and they're a baby face, and it depends on who they're wrestling, you're making a wishy-washy fucking guy. Because I'm true to who I am no matter what I do, and then people take it the way they like. If I was trying to make them all mad, I probably could.
Right, and that's an important distinction. So basically what you're saying, the idea of intentionally having a roster full of tweeners and just letting the audience decide for themselves, that doesn't work.
No, you have to let the audience decide for themselves. As if somebody is, like with Austin, when they first started, he was a heel, but they started liking him. So there was a bunch of people booing him and a bunch of people cheering him, but at least they were making noise. But he wasn't trying for that. He was just trying to be himself. You know, if you, and then eventually it came down on the side of, yes, everybody in the world. Do you remember any wrestling fan in the world that didn't like Steve Austin by the time that process was finished?
I think I was the only one.
Well, well, there you go. So it has to come. You're making a transition, and you can be a tweener while you're making a transition, but you can't long term just go in with the idea of, I'm going to make this guy a tweener. And some nights some people will cheer him and some will boo him. No, you've got to get, sooner or later, he's got to be on one side or the other. Because otherwise nobody gives a shit.